I'd like to welcome to the stage to talk about external development, Tara Phillips from Keyword Studio. So a round of applause for Tara. There we go. And now
Awesome.
get out of your way and you've got your clicker there.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming to this room to listen to me talk. My name is Tara Phillips. I am solutions architect for our Create services within Keywords. I'm going to show you a quick video just to introduce you a little bit to Keywords. This is not a sales pitch. I'm showing you this from the perspective of, why I'm here to talk about more the global view of going external, working with external developers and partners, and how do you go about doing that? Before I show you the video, just a quick show of hands for who's here. How many people have worked with external developers or outsourcers before? Okay, awesome. How many people in this room are interested in doing that for the first time? All right, cool, awesome, this is great. How many people are external developers, are outsourcers? Okay, so feel free to argue with me about any of the points that I bring up in our talk today. So. So Keywords is a global organization made up of more than 70 different studios across the world that focus on all kinds of different areas of game development and providing services. The service line that I'm a part of is called the Create service line, and this is specific to art and game development services. I come from an art production background. I was an art director for a long time before I sort of started working more into account management and now solutions architecting. What that really means is because Keywords has grown so huge, this is just our Create Services studio locations. It can be difficult for clients to kind of come to Keywords and know which studios to work with for what kind of work and things like that. So my role is to really interface with our clients, understand what they need from a sort of production perspective, how we solve their problems, and then make recommendations and introductions to our studios who are going to solve those things. So why does this matter? Well, I get a kind of a privileged position to see everything across the industry. We work with all the big AAA studios like the Microsofts, the EAs, the Sonys, and so on, but also with indies. We work with publishers. We work with all sorts of different size teams, easy problems to really difficult problems to full development. So I kind of see it all, which means that I have a perspective of knowing what works and doesn't work, what are some of the common problems. But what I want to talk about a little bit is why external development. This is from the XDS 2022 Insights report. If any of you guys are interested at all in knowing what's going on in external development, definitely go Google that Insights report because there's loads of information. This kind of just talks through some of the main reasons why people choose to work externally, and then also a bit of a breakdown on how much people are spending in external development, how much money is going into that as an industry, and this of course covers everything, localization, marketing, things like that as well. So it's not just what I do and the art and game dev side, but there's some interesting statistics and reasons to consider why you would want to work with an external partner to help boost what you do. So what I want to do is talk about how to set yourself up to succeed. working externally is a really great option, but we can talk about avoiding common speed bumps. So when you first start looking into working with an external partner, there are some things that can slow that down, make it more difficult. We're going to talk about some of those things. We're going to talk about how do you see the red flags? How do you know that the partner that you're looking into, that you're going through that due diligence on, that they're going to be a good partner, that they're going to work for you, and be a collaborator and a partner in the work that you're doing. And then how to cross the finish line as a team. I'm going to talk really fast because I have a very limited amount of time, so I'm going to work through this. But if you guys have questions or things like that, come and find me. I'll be around for the next 2 days. So expectations versus reality. When we think about what it would be like to go and work with an external team, we can break it down as kind of 4 basic steps. You have your discovery, so Google, try to find, who are partners that I could be working with for the type of work that I need. You're going to get a whole list of studios. You're going to look at a million websites. You're going to say, oh yeah, that one, and that one. That looks great. Then you're going to do your due diligence. Maybe you think, oh yeah, that's going to take about a week. Maybe you have time. Due diligence, that's about 2 weeks. I'll reach out to all of these studios and I'll kind of find the best fit. And then I'll pull together a contract to say, okay, cool, let's work together. Contract, that should take about a week, and then we're going to kick off, right? What this really looks like, and what I see on a daily basis, looks a lot more like this. You don't need to go through and read all of this, but I will say that it is typically pretty messy. And I think one way that you can really put your best foot forward in terms of creating a really great partnership with a service provider is to not let them see this of you. So we're going to talk about how to do that in maybe a little bit more of a structured way, or at least give you something to consider in terms of making that process a lot faster and easier. So I hear a lot of feedback from developers and clients that talk about working externally. This is one that I hear all the time. Working with an external developer is too hard, it takes too long to set up, and they don't understand our project priorities. So speed bumps can be mitigated in advance, and it starts with you. So before you ever get started, the first thing that you want to do as a team is have internal alignment. What I see often is that you'll have somebody reaching out to service providers, and they don't necessarily know everything about what's needed. And maybe the production team or the leadership on that team aren't even sure what they want, or aren't even sure that they want to do it. There's a lot of questions that get unanswered, and what can happen is when you start to engage with outsourcing teams or with external developers, you get roadblocks internally, right? So you might start that process and then hit a speed bump because there isn't agreement internally. So take the time, make sure everybody's on board, all the different stakeholders that might have something to say about it, make sure that they're aligned. Make sure that you have a dedicated external development point of contact. So this is for business and account management. Having somebody who's going to essentially be the catcher on your team, the person who is responsible for doing the due diligence, for communicating, for setting up things like contracts, for sharing access to things. That is that go-to person. You want to have somebody, it might not be their full-time job, depends on how big your team is, but they should be aware that this is what they're responsible for. A production level POC. So this is the person who is going to be intaking the work that will happen as you engage with an external partner. So who is the person who's going to be reviewing the work? Who is the person who's going to be giving feedback? They're going to be implementing. They're going to be doing all of these things that are going to actually make working with an external partner useful. Have documentation available. The amount of times that I've had to tease out information over weeks and weeks of time from a client to try to understand what actually they're trying to do, what are they looking for, what are they making, why do they need you, all of those things. The more you can share in advance, under an NDA, obviously, get your paperwork in place, but the more you can sort of share, the more that team will have a chance to work with you and understand what you're trying to achieve. So things like information also, or documentation about what platform you're working towards, what engine you're working on. Do you have any proprietary software or tools that you're using? that kind of stuff is all super important as well as considering how you're going to be sharing your documentation and information. Do you want to give access to your perforce? Things like that. Like those are things that you should be considering in advance of getting in touch. Budget range. Think of it like buying a house. It's on you to understand the market. So think a little bit about what things actually cost. Maybe try to do some research in advance of what things actually cost when you're going to an external partnership. But give yourself a range. So just like when you're buying a house, you know what your top is, but you also know like, well, what's the minimum size house I want to buy? How much is that going to be? And then give yourself a range as opposed to saying, here's my budget number, that's it. It gives you a little more flexibility to think about how to approach working with a partner or a variety of partners. Project scope, know what you're trying to do and how much of it. That one's pretty self-explanatory, but it's a question that I have to ask all the time and tease out. So consider what it is that you're trying to achieve, have kind of your like minimum viable, and then say like if that's going really well and we could always do more, but this is what we're going to focus on right now. And then legal framework or a legal team. There's going to be contracts involved. There should be contracts involved anyways. And so making sure that you at least know how you would approach signing contracts. A lot of service providers will have their own SOW contracts and things like that, templates that they have because they do this all the time. So you don't necessarily have to have it for yourself, but definitely be comfortable in the fact that you would have to review some legal documents. So next thing, they were great at first glance, but it fell apart when we got started. It would have been easier to do it all ourselves. So this is another piece of feedback that I hear pretty often. This is about red flags to watch for and what they might mean about a potential partner. So as you're going through that due diligence process, you've done your Googling, you've checked out, okay, I know what my budget is, I know all the things. Now I can start evaluating some of these potential partners and what am I going to look for? So this is about like sort of maybe developing a bit of a spidey sense. I wouldn't say that any of these red flags are like reason to run, but they're things to be considerate of so that you can go into things eyes wide open. So the first one would be too willing to excessively lower their rates. So they come to you, they see here's our rates, you're like, well, that's a little out of my price range, and they're like, okay, and they slash it by 50%. This is a big red flag because in the service industry, it's like walking into a store or a restaurant, and they have created a budget and they're working towards margins. And so if you're a stable business, you would know how much money you need to make in order to be able to keep your operations running. And if they're coming in with a price that they're going to bring really low, that's going to signal a couple things to you. Either they don't know their good business practices and they could potentially go under in the next year because they haven't been able to keep the lights on, is one thing. Or they've come in with excessive pricing to try to get, I don't want to say gouge you, but to try to get more than what they really should be charging. So those are things to consider. They don't respond to emails or only partially respond. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's it's a best foot forward situation. If they're not going to be answering their emails, at the get-go, then expect that that's what it's going to be like to be in production with them. They have no extensive public portfolio or credits list that they can share with you. This is more of a signal of partnership capability. So if it's a studio that can't talk a lot about the projects that they've worked on, it could mean that they didn't have a close enough partnership with the developer that they worked on in order to receive permission to be able to use things, or they've been working with as a subcontractor for another external developer, which is not a bad thing, but it just means that they don't potentially have the experience of working directly with a developer. They've been doing that through sort of a chain event, let's say. Conversations around InfoSec are evasive. So if you don't understand what processes they have in place for information security and they can't speak to it very confidently, then that's a red flag. A testing team, or so if you ever hear the phrase testing team, or if after you've done a test, they're like, okay, we're going to introduce you to this whole other team, that's a huge red flag. That means that they've essentially given you the A team for a test, and that they're going to now start cycling those people off and give you a completely different team, which isn't necessarily super problematic, but again, red flag, right? You want to consider what that's going to mean for you long term as you go into production. They have excessive availability. If they're telling you that they've got 200 artists available, or they've got a whole 60-person dev team ready to go, that's cause for pause. Now, right now the industry is a little softer, so you're going to see maybe a little more availability than it has been in the last 3 years. But I would say just question that. And then obviously overpromise, underdeliver. This is a big red flag. And then unable to clearly lay out their project management process, how they build their teams, communications, standard operations procedure, all of those things. They should be able to clearly communicate to you, this is what it's going to be like to work with us, this is what you can expect, and then have those things followed up. The last section we're going to talk about is how to finish your project well. So the team never really met our expectations, and while they got us to the end of the project, we kind of limped along the whole time, and I wouldn't work with them again. So this is something that I hear a lot as well. It's this idea of like, well, we've committed to working with this team. I guess we're sort of stuck with them. We're just going to have to just deal with it, and then as soon as that project's done, like, we're going to boot them out the door, right? So here's a couple of things to talk about or to think about as you're working through a partnership, working through production with an external partner. Be clear with yourself and your partner about what success looks like. So know what it is that you're expecting from them. Be clear about that. And then if that changes, you need to have a conversation about that. If you've decided now you're going to change your scope, or you've decided that you want to add in a new feature or change something, that needs to be a conversation, because you can't just assume that that team that you are working with for one thing is going to also be good at something else when you change the rules, right? So they need to have the opportunity to say yes or no, this is a thing that we can do or we can't do. Have things like trackable KPIs, like timelines, schedules, quality, training, things that you can use as numbers, not to use as like a stick to like hit people with, but as a place to start when you want to have conversations about how things are going, right? It should never be used as ammunition. It should be a thing where you say, well, this looks interesting. Okay, I'm at 8 seconds, so I have a couple more points and then I'm done. Early and consistent feedback, both ways. So encourage feedback, foster a lot of feedback from both sides. You are in a power dynamic because you are paying someone for services. So always keep that in mind. Be the partner that you would want to work with. We're all humans. Cultivate a culture of honesty and trust. So create a situation where if they come to you and tell you about a problem or something like that, it's not a blame game. It's not a, oh, you're a terrible partner, or, oh, we should have gone with somebody else. Try to take time to understand what's going on and why an issue has come up. Problems will arise. Don't deflect, and discover with integrity. So always try to feel that empathy, because they're just trying to do the best for you. The business model is not to upset clients, right? You always want to be doing the best that you can. And so just always kind of go into it believing that that's the goal for everybody. I don't know that I have time for questions, because I know there's another talk.
If there's one question, maybe we can take one question.
Awesome. Oh, yeah.
So, other than just having like documentation, how do you really convey your vision for your product that you're making? Like, do you just like, you want your external partner to have the same kind of vision you have when you want the product to come out? How do you really get that? Is that documentation or some other way?
It depends on where you're at in the production cycle. If you're super early on, things like a vision document or an art Bible or a game design document is super helpful. If you're further along, being able to give things like Steam keys or showing them a demo of the game. But basically think of it as if you were to hire internally for a role in game design or art or whatever, how would you onboard them? How would you tell an internal employee that you've just hired about your game and get them enrolled in the vision. That's essentially how you should treat going externally and sort of getting them on board with what you're doing.
I think we'll have to leave it there. So a round of applause for
Okay. Thanks so much.